I can hear you.
All right, great. You can see my my first slide there as well.
Yeah, we can see your PowerPoint, and you can turn your video on. It's just the presenters who aren't presenting currently, maybe turn it off, because Derek was thinking maybe that's why his computer got kicked off or something.
Oh, that's all right. As long, I mean, you can see my screen, and that's.
But we want to see your pretty face.
Well, all right, we can
Whatever.
put that on too.
Okay, so Rich Roehm is going to do use of pesticides.
All right. Let's see. Are we good here then?
We see the title page, Rich Roehm.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Morning, everyone. My name is Rich Roehm, and I coming to you from my office here in Denver. I work for the Helena Agri Enterprises Company, and we distribute pesticides and fertility products to the green industry statewide. I've been doing this for well, this is my 20th year in this side of the game here, and Bonnie's been kind enough to invite me to speak on use of pesticides here first. I have a couple of other talks that we're going to get to later in the day, but I very much appreciate the opportunity, and will do my best here. So, use of pesticides here. What do we need to know before we start spraying? The labels are going to tell us an awful lot about what we need to know, how to protect ourselves, how to protect the environment, what we need to do afterwards, what we can expect afterwards, how much to use, all sorts of things like that. That's what the label is going to tell us before we even open the jug. I'm also going to point out here at this time that throughout a number of my talks here this morning, you're going to see some artwork on some of these pages. And the first question you're going to ask yourself is, what does that picture have to do with whatever it is that guy is talking about at the moment? And friends, the answer is probably nothing at all. Some of the artwork is original. I like to do chalk art on sidewalks and pavement. That's what this piece is here. Some of the rest of it is pictures of other artists that I've known around town. So just enjoy it. Don't worry about what it means or if it applies to the actual talk. Talk about a couple of different applications when it comes to putting pesticides in or near water. Okay, the verbiage that is on the label often says, what is a dry down scenario? What is water's edge? And then the other thing you're very certainly going to have to know is, what is the fate of the water? Where does it go? Who drinks it? Does it water anything? What's going to happen after you put this pesticide in or near it? Groundwater contamination, frankly, while a possibility, is less likely in an ornamental application, and that's usually because groundwater is deeper than 30 feet. Now, I appreciate that some of the applications that you folks are likely to be making out there, that's not the case. But if you're making an ornamental application, there's an awful lot of organic water or organic matter between that water and where you're putting that pesticide. And that organic matter is what's going to take and hold that pesticide where you put it. So that's sometimes pretty important to consider. At present, the only herbicidal compounds that have ornamental, rangeland, and as well as an aquatic allowance are triclopyr. Both, there's two types of forms, the amine and the acid formulations that have the aquatic allowances. 2,4-Ds, the amines and the acid formulations both have aquatic allowances. Imazapyr, which is sold as Polaris, Habitat, and probably a bunch of other different ways. And then also Imazamox, which is Clearcast, and glyphosate. Okay, everything else goes up to water's edge. Okay, those are the only products right there, the only compounds right there that will actually go into an aquatic application and on land. There are plenty of compounds, of course, that go directly into water and only into water. That's the fluoridones, the endothols, the aquathols, things like that. And that's just what they do. They're designed to kill aquatic weeds, and they don't go on land. There are no aquatic labeled insecticides. There are some that won't kill fish, but there are no insecticides that you can apply on land and also in the water. There are some mosquito control products that are designed to be only put in the water. They wouldn't be appropriate for spraying anything on the land, okay? So we put this stuff down, whatever it is. What is going to determine how much it will move in a soil? Well, the texture, how much clay, how much sand, how much loam. These are all factors that you maybe want to consider if you're wanting to put a soil residual, especially herbicide or insecticidal compound down. The pH is also going to be important, but know this, you're probably going to be more successful changing the pH in the tank before you're going to change the pH in the soil. Some of these products that we spray and spread work a lot better at certain pHs, and you're going to want to do that before you put them in the tank. Organic matter is the most significant factor in determining the absorption of a pesticide. If there's a higher amount of organic matter in a soil, it's more likely to bind and it's more likely to stay there. Lower amounts of organic matter, you're going to have less success in keeping the pesticide where you want it to be. Okay. The soil structure and macropores, the air spaces within the soil, large cracks, things like that. Those things are also going to be important. Obviously, a pesticide is not going to bind to an air pocket within a soil profile, and the more of those, the more leaching you're going to have. Now, here's what we can measure about pesticides. The absorptivity is measured by the KOC value. Okay. The KOC value is going to tell us how likely or unlikely a pesticide is to bind to the soil particles, the soil profile. The higher that value, and they're assigned a number value, the higher that value, the more likely that absorption level will be. Okay, so you say, well, what's a high value? The stuff that is designed to stay in the soil, things like atrazine and diuron and pre-emergent products for ornamental applications, they have higher KOC values. Pendimethalin and dimension, which are two fairly commonly used pre-emergent herbicides in lawn care, they have KOC values of 24,000. Okay, some of the other products that we have are again in terms of 10 and 20,000. The soil applied insecticides that we use have very low KOC values. Imidacloprid is about 300. Okay, Safari, which is dinotefuran, is even lower than that. Okay, Acephate, which is orthene, is 2. There's a very old product that was used in greenhouses. It had a KOC value of 30. Okay, these are products that we're putting in the soil, but we don't want them to stay there. Okay, we want them to be absorbed by the roots of the plant that we're putting it next to, so that the plant can take it up and it controls the insects up in that plant. Some of the herbicides that have low KOC values and therefore are not going to bind very well to the soil particles are Dicamba and Tordon. 2, chlorpyrrolid, part of what's in curtail, is even less than that, as a KSC value of 1. So we're putting that stuff in the ground, putting that stuff in the soil, but it's not likely to hang around there very long. It's going to go somewhere else. And yes, this KSC value is definitely something you should be concerned about when you're putting down a soil residual herbicide, especially on a sandy soil. No organic matter, nothing for it to bind to. If you're putting down an insecticide, you're going to want to consider the KOC value as well, because sometimes those insecticides are not going to be taken up by the plants that we're looking for them to be taken up by. Okay, we're not going to be very successful if we're putting down the wrong stuff and it's getting taken up by the wrong plants. Solubility. Okay, this is the tendency of a pesticide to dissolve in water. Okay, it's measured in parts per million. It's going to help in telling us how likely a pesticide might be to move off target if we get a rainstorm or a snow event or something like that. But every pesticide has a solubility measurement. It's measured in parts per million. Okay, a solubility index that's greater than 30 would be considered very high for a herbicide. Okay, come to find out, that's nearly everything we spray. I'm not aware of any herbicide that has a solubility factor lower than 30. Okay, these are products that are designed to be mixed with and applied in water. Okay, sometimes we mix surfactants with them, and that helps spread them around and that helps solubilize them, but they start out as generally being very high soluble products. They dissolve in water. Okay, Dicamba is 500,000. 2,4-D is even more than that, and glyphosate is 900,000. Now, those numbers are just numbers. They don't mean as much, but just know that the higher the number, the more soluble that material is. Glyphosate is not going to last. It's not going to stick around to anything. It's going to go wherever the water takes it because it's dissolved in that water. Okay, this is a horrible example of that. Okay, that's snow over which underneath is grass, and over which somebody has applied a dinitroaniline pre-emergent herbicide, something like pendimethalin or barricade, perhaps. Those are both orange. Okay, it's very soluble, so it's going to be carried wherever that snow melts and that water takes it. Sometimes that might be down into the ground where we want it to be, but most likely it's going to run onto the sidewalk, into the gutter, and not very much of it is going to get to the root zone where we want it to be. Okay, for an insecticide we're putting in the soil, that can be both good and bad. Okay, if it's an insecticide that we want to be absorbed by a plant, pulling water out of the ground and carrying it up into the top of the tree where the insects are, that's a good thing. We want stuff that's going to move in water and be taken up by the tree whose root zone we're putting it in. Okay, those are some of the insecticidal compounds. Dinotefuran is safari, acephate is orthene. These are both materials. Imidacloprid is sold a lot of different ways, but these are both all materials that we would put into the root zone of that tree, and then the root zone takes it up into the canopy and controls the insects that way. Permethrin is also an insecticide, but it has a solubility of less than 1. Okay, it's not going to be picked up by the tree roots. You cannot put permethrin in the soil and expect it to control the insects that are in the top of that tree. So knowing these things are going to help us be more successful. Volatility measures how fast a pesticide evaporates when it makes contact with air. Okay, more so an issue with herbicides. Okay, we've all heard about esters that volatilize and then drift, and at certain temperatures they become vapor. They can drift over off target and they can damage things. Okay, our industry has realized this, and there was a time when volatility was considered a good thing because it helped with control. Well, now it's not so much, and we've developed some herbicidal compounds that are less volatile. Okay, you've probably heard about the acid formulations of things like Dicamba and 2,4-D and triclopyr. Well, these are better ways of making the old stuff. One of those better ways is that they don't volatilize as well. Some of them not at all. And this is considered a good thing now because we don't have that off-target drift. Mostly it's the petroleum distillates that are causing that volatility. But again, these new compounds, they've gotten a step ahead of that, and so they're more readily absorbed by the plant, and it doesn't matter as much if you're spraying it at higher temperatures because you're not going to get that volatility. Degradation, which is how long a material is going to remain in the soil, is measured in terms of half-life. Okay, this is based on a lot of different factors that we can only guess at. Things like rainfall, moisture, soil pH, microbial activity. These are all factors that help break down that herbicide that you put in the ground and want to create a bare ground with for an entire season. Okay, most of the bare ground products do have a measurement of degradation. Okay, but friends, that measurement is usually only a best guess. Okay, they're not going to be that precise, and again, it's based a lot on things like rainfall, snowfall, pH, microbial activity, and stuff that we can only wonder about. There really is not a practical way to shorten or extend the life of pesticides in the soil. Okay, we wish we could do that sometimes. We wish we could make them last longer. Okay, we wish we could take them out after we put them there sometimes. There are some materials, some of these carbon and charcoal materials that do have a propensity to bind up a herbicidal compound as long as it has not started to bind to the organic matter in that soil. Okay, what that means, if you make a misapplication and you want to fix it, you have to fix it pretty darn soon after you made that application. Okay, if you're talking in terms of months or years later, you're not going to be able to do that. The activated carbons and charcoals just don't react that quickly. But those are as good as it gets when it comes to reversing a herbicide or insecticide application. All right, let's move above ground here for a minute. The most common post-emergent herbicide compounds are these 6 families. And later in the day, I'm going to do a talk on pesticides and families, and we go specifically into what these are, but we'll cover them a little bit here real quickly. The phenoxys, these friends are the 2,4-Ds, the dicambas, the MCPPs of the world. Okay, the pyridines, those are the tordons, the milestones, the vistas, the garlons. Both of those 2 families are auxin inhibitors as their modes of action. That's how they kill the weed, but they're different enough that they don't cross over from one another, and they can be mixed successfully. The SUs or the sulfonylureas are the ALS inhibitors. This is the telars, the escorts. Imazapic is an ALS inhibitor. So is imazapyr. ALS stands for acetolactate synthase. That is a type of enzyme that's in broadleaf plants. These herbicides affect that enzyme, alter it, and eventually will control the plant. The protox inhibitors, these are things like carfentrazone, sulfentrazone, some products like that. They have some pre-emergent compounds like flumioxazine. Protox is also an enzyme that is in the type of plant, and this family of herbicides will control that enzyme. EPSP synthase inhibitors, there's only one. Its name is glyphosate. Okay, that's the only formulation that we have that is an EPSP inhibitor. And then the HPPD inhibitors, those are some newer chemistries. Okay, those are things like mesotrone. Frequency is one of those. They have some pre and post emergent activity, some ornamental as well as rangeland applications. But that is also an enzyme in the plant that is altered by that herbicide. Of all those modes of actions, each product has an ornamental allowance on its label. Okay, some have broadcast limitations like 2,4-D. Chlorpyrrolid you cannot put on residential turf. It has to be commercial turf. There's some limitations about golf courses, and if you're going to be harvesting that turf eventually, and you're going to want to look on the label from those. But there are several of those compounds that do cross over into what we call native areas, whether they're grazed or not. Oftentimes the verbiage that you'll see on the label allows for unimproved or industrial turf. Okay, that's a pretty broad statement. It's open to a lot of interpretation, but in general, it means turf that not necessarily mowed all the time or even irrigated all the time. And that allows you a little more leeway with using that particular compound. The single most deciding factor or deal breaker as far as grazing is going to be whether a domesticated animal is going to graze there, or if hay is going to be harvested from that site in that growing season. Okay, the deer and the elk, if they wander onto that rangeland and nibble on the grass, they're on their own. They don't count as being grazers. It's things like cows and horses. The products whose logos are listed there are a number of them. Some of them are combination products, and some of them are mixed and matched with other things. But those are the ones that generally go on grazed or hayed sites. A couple of them have ornamental applications, or you can put them in residential applications as well. When it comes to soft residual bare ground products, we have a number of different options, but not a whole lot of compounds and active ingredients. Okay, what I mean when I say soft residual bare ground products, I'm referring to places that aren't ornamental. Okay, they don't have landscaping right in them, but they do have a tree or some sort of vegetation next to it that require you to not use a sterilant, require you to not use something that'll kill that tree. Okay, so that's what I mean when I refer to soft residual products. Some of them, like Gallery and Dimension and Barricade and even Spectacle, also go into residential lawn care. They can be applied to ornamental turf, whereas products like Esplanade and Frequency and Piper, Clean Tracks even, you wouldn't put them in an ornamental setting. But they're certainly going to be appropriate in a bare ground setting where you're going to where you're not going to want to kill the tree whose roots go into that zone. Esplanade and Spectacle are the same stuff. That's indaziflam. They just have different labeling. Piper and SureGuard both have flumioxazin in them. So you can see that, you know, there's an evolution here with the manufacturers, that they're mixing and matching different compounds to both broaden the spectrum of the weeds controlled and to also stay ahead of resistance. If you can get a couple of different modes of action in the same jug or in the same bag, you're going to be ahead of the weeds and their herbicide resistance. The hard bare ground materials, these tend to have neither a grazing allowance or an ornamental allowance on their label. Okay, as a sales rep, I do get calls from homeowners who want to know how they can sterilize their dirt driveway leading up to their house. They want to put a sterilant there, keep the weeds down all year. My first thought is you probably don't. Okay, there's nothing labeled as a hard sterilant for ornamental applications. And if there were, you probably wouldn't want to use it because it would indeed kill the tree whose roots go into that. Okay, method is aminocyclopyrachlor. Used to be sold as part of what was in Perspective. Now you can buy it as plain view with imazapyr and Tellar also mixed in. But these are some of the examples of the hard bare ground market, and there's a very real science into applying hard bare ground materials, wanting to stay ahead of weed resistances and not kill the vegetation that's surrounding it, as well as controlling the weeds for an entire season. But right there, friends, the aminocyclopyrachlors and the imazapyrs seem to be the best products that we have going at the moment. Use of Dicamba has been beat up pretty hard here lately. Can't buy it as an ag formulation anymore. You can still buy it in a lot of the lawn care 3-way and 4-way formulations, but Dicamba is a herbicide compound. Its days are numbered. It's been banned outright in Arkansas, as well as a lot of other states now. Arkansas is not the only one. Again, you can still buy it in a number of lawn care formulations in very small quantities. There's a couple of different sides to this. It drifted, it volatilized more than it should have, and it damaged some crops that were not Dicamba resistant. There is Dicamba resistant crops now out. So when Dicamba was used on those crops and then drifted or volatilized over to the ones that were not Dicamba resistant, they had some problems. And that is that's the short story of why Dicamba has been pulled from the market. It has a lot of other issues, and its days may be numbered. As bad a year as Dicamba had, glyphosate had an even tougher one. Derek did a very, very nice job of addressing some of the litigation issues and why it's still an important herbicide and an important product that we use and maintain and use properly. But regardless, it did have a tough year. I get asked mostly from the lawn care and landscaper sides, well, what's the next man up? Okay, if we can't use glyphosate, what are we going to use for non-selective post-emergent weed control? Friends, the list is short. It's not as good, and most of the products are more expensive. But we do have some options. Scythe is fatty acids. There's a couple other fatty acid formulations that are out there as well. Glufosinate is a group 10. It is close to a group 9, which is what EPSP inhibitors are. So Glufosinate is close to glyphosate, but it's not in the same family. It's sold as Phenale and Cheetah Pro. There's a material called ammonium nanoate, which is also labeled for most ornamental as well as non-crop applications. Again, all non-selective post-emergent options. In conclusion, perhaps the most pesticide-free commodity is our newest agriculture compound. But interestingly enough, they don't have a whole lot of mode of action choices for cannabis and for hemp. They have a lot of products that they can use, but very, very few modes of action. These include essential oils, some botanicals, some biologicals that are more designed to repel than they are to actually control some of the pests. And they tend to smother them or even repel them. But the long-term controls are just not something that we have going forward in terms of insecticidal or herbicidal compounds labeled for the cannabis or the hemp market. But friends, that's what I've prepared for the use of pesticides. We can certainly take some questions if it's appropriate, or whatever you'd like to do there, Bonnie.
Does anybody have questions for Rick? Nope. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's see, what's our next one?